I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Today, the question that we are trying to answer is, how does the DJI Digital FPV system interfere or not interfere with traditional analog systems? And even if you're somebody who would never buy the DJI system, you should still pay attention to this video, because somebody out there is buying the DJI Digital FPV system. And when they show up at the field and want to fly, you're going to need to know how to keep them from knocking you out of the air. And that's what this video is all about. All right, let's start with question number 1. What do the goggles do when you power the goggles on with the air unit turned off? Do the goggles themselves interfere with analog video? And we're using the rapid fire here in the upper right hand corner of the screen as a rudimentary spectrum analyzer, and the goggles are powered up and nothing is happening. I mean, I'm sure the goggles are doing some kind of, like, they're listening or whatever they're doing, but basically no energy appears on the spectrum. That little hump around 3 or 4, it doesn't matter. That's just background stuff at my house. All right, so now we unplug the goggles. We're going to plug the air unit in. The air unit is powered up and the goggles are off. And here is the first interesting thing to come from this. The air unit powers up on channel race 6. This is DJI channel 8. That is their sort of default channel. And this is interesting because the goggles are actually set to DJI channel 7. So the air unit does not remember the last channel that it was on. It always powers up on race 6. And that means that if you have this system and you're on a different channel, it is not safe for you to power up your quad. You have to power up the goggles first, but even then you're still going to blast race 6 for just a second as you bring it up. Now we're going to move the air unit over a few feet away from the goggles just so it's not blasting right in their face. And you can kind of see in the distance I've set it on a fan, so it's got some air cooling so it doesn't go into overheat shutdown mode. And we're going to plug in the goggles, and you'll see that as the goggles power up, they communicate with the air unit. You're going to see the goggles are set to DJI channel 7, which corresponds to race 8 for some confusing reason. And as they come up, the air unit will move over to its commanded channel. There you go. There, it happened right there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to power up an analog VTX. This analog VTX is at 200 milliwatts. It is a Unify race. We're going to go ahead and turn that guy on, and we will see in the spectrum that it is set to channel race 1. I wanted to give as much benefit of the doubt to the DJI system as possible, so I set the two of them as far apart as they could possibly be. DJI channel 7, which is race 8, and the quad is down on race 1. I want you to see that I'm putting the analog transmitter on the desk here, also on a fan to help make sure it stays cool. And it is about, I would say, I haven't pulled out a tape measure, but it's maybe 6 or 8 feet, roughly 2 meters, Europeans, and out the whole rest of the world too, from the DJI. So they're not right up in each other's face, but they're not far apart. We'll get to that in a minute. So the first question is, do the goggles cause any kind of interference with the analog receiver under these conditions? I'm going to take the analog goggles and I'm going to hold them right up next to the DJI goggles and see if they create any interference. And under these test conditions, at least, they don't. The two quads are about 10 or 12 feet away from the goggles. The two goggles are literally kissing each other. No interference there. What if I bring the analog receiver right over next to the air unit? It's transmitting at 700 milliwatts. Surely we would see some breakup then. And we do. In fact, if I get the antennas right next to each other, like literally touching, we start to see some breakup. But here's the thing to keep in mind. The analog transmitter is also very close, and so the analog signal is also very strong here. But in this situation, actually, things are pretty good. What let's do now is let's make a more realistic scenario, because this scenario where we've got two quads in the same room, like 8 feet from each other, it's not very realistic. I'm going to take the analog quad at 25 milliwatts, and I'm going to take it like outside. I'm carrying it out. There you go. So I'm going to set it outside, and this is to simulate the scenario where you are out flying, like out in the field, and someone powers up the DJI system like near you on the flight line. So here, the distance we've gone is actually not that far, but we've got like the exterior wall of my house, which is fairly thick and attenuating between us. And here at a distance of maybe 2 or 3 feet, that's about 1 meter, it's not too bad, but as we get to maybe 1 foot, it definitely is some interference, pretty substantial interference. And if we go stand over by the goggles, we can see the type of interference they create is, it looks a little different, doesn't it, than the air unit. But again, you got to be real freaking close before it really starts to show up. Like they're practically touching. And as I move away, even a moderate distance, you can kind of see it, but it's not too bad. Now let's try an even more challenging scenario. The analog quad is even further away. I've turned the output power down to 25 milliwatts, and as soon as I go in the door of my house, you're going to see this image get really snowy and weak. Still basically flyable, although I dare say if it weren't using a really high performance module like Rapid Fire Clearview or perhaps TrueDX, you might be seeing a lot more breakup and dropout. In just a second, I'm going to plug the air unit on, look for any glitch that happens when it first powers up, and look for, oh, there was the glitch. That was the power up glitch. Look for any effect on the analog receiver from the air unit. And I do think we definitely see that the analog receiver starts having a much harder time in this test set case. Again, this is the weakest the analog transmitter could be, and the analog receiver is fairly close to the air unit. So this is, again, a very worst case scenario, but it is demonstrating the potential for interference is there under the right conditions. We're going to unplug. Yep, there we go. We unplug the air unit, and there the picture comes right back. By the way, the observant among you will notice that I am killing my battery. It's down to 2.5 volts per cell. I accidentally wasn't paying attention and killed this battery. So I don't think that affected the results. You can just see that as soon as I plug in the air unit, the image gets worse, and as soon as I unplug it, it gets better. But in a second, this video is going to drop out, and I'll have killed my battery. Oops. The sacrifices I make for you guys. There it goes. Next scenario. Until now, we've been looking at the effect of the DJI system on the analog system because, let's face it, most of us are going to be flying analog, and we want to know how this DJI system is going to screw with us. But what if you've got the DJI system? What effect is an analog quad being in the air going to have on you? Here you can see me taking the DJI goggles out. I'm going to walk the DJI goggles out into the field until I get down to about 2 bars of signal strength. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to turn the analog quad off, and I'm going to see if basically having an analog quad just out there flying around, the quad is here in the room, right? So it's far away from the goggles. Basically just see if having an analog quad out there flying around has any effect on the DJI system. Okay, so the DJI goggles are at 1 bar, but they're holding in. It's like 16 megabits per second. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this guy on and see if it messes them up. These guys are, I guess, 6 feet apart. 25 milliwatts. And as you can see here, there was basically no effect when I powered up the analog transmitter. So what this suggests is that even if the DJI system is at a relatively weak 2 bars, having another analog transmitter out there flying around in the field shouldn't have much of an effect. Okay guys, here's the last test of the day. We're going to set both the DJI and the analog system to 25 milliwatts so they're on an equal footing as far as power goes. I want to do this for 2 reasons. Number 1, so I didn't have to walk a million miles down the road to get the signal to get weak, and number 2, because my video transmitter on this quad is a Unify race and it only goes up to 200 milliwatts. So anyway, both of them are at 25 milliwatts, and now I'm taking both the DJI goggles and the analog goggles far, far away. And what we're basically going to look at here is how they compare at equal distance and equal location. This is as close as we can really get to a straight up head-to-head. Both of the quads are here in the office. They're like in basically the same location, and we're just going to see which of these does better. That's the gist of it. Let's go. 25 milliwatts. The analog is at 25 milliwatts. Let's go. So immediately we're seeing, now that we're too close to the goggles and we're seeing those lines show up. So I'm going to have to hold it at some distance in order to avoid that. Like hold it out at arm's length now. This is holding it in near my chest. So you can immediately see the further we get from the VTX, the more interference there are between the goggles. This is the goggles and the analog receiver. This is at arm's length. I just can't get it any further away. So now we're seeing analog breakup. for sure. How are the DJI goggles doing? I gotta leave my glasses on. DJI goggles are 1 bar on the DJI, 12 to 19 to 14 megabits per second. Oh, we just jumped to 3 bars when I turned my head though. So looking solid. 25 meg, oh, 2 bars. So it's wavering between 2 and 3 bars, but it's got 29 millisecond latency, 25 megabit per second. So that's basically as good as it gets, almost. Now we can see as we come around you can't see this, but as I come around the corner here, the analog is definitely starting to break up. In a minute, I'm gonna turn the goggles off. Okay, so let's, yeah, so here we're totally losing the analog signal because we've gone around the corner. Let's, I gotta leave my goggles on, my glasses on. So let's, stop the recording and turn off the DJI goggles. So here we can see the signal is, let's go a little further. We don't have that digital interference in the signal now for sure, but we're still pretty much at the edge of range. You wouldn't want to fly through this, would you? I would be pretty skeptical about flying through it. There, see, we're getting total losses. DJI goggles are off at this point. Nothing is affecting the signal. Yep, we're occasionally getting a good bounce, but quite often we're just getting, this is pretty bad. Now let's turn the DJI goggles back on. Let's see, it'll take them a second to boot up. No major effect on the signal. DJI is now booted up. Image transmission stopped. There we go, it got it. It's logged in. We start the recording again. We're at 3 megabits per second now, 1 bar. So now our bit rate is just garbage. It's still holding the latency fairly well because I've got it set to low latency mode. So we're within a 10-foot distance of where they both went away and just sort of completely lost it. Like if we come back 10 feet this direction, we'll start to get the analog signal back. It's definitely getting confused. There we go. Analog is stable. Digital is 15 megabits per second, 2 bars, 11 megabits, 17 megabits per second, 2 bars, 24 millisecond latency. So we're back in like totally flyable range for both the digital and the analog. Okay. All right, folks, that's going to bring us to the end of this video. I hope this has helped you figure out, if you are an analog pilot, what you can expect if a DJI pilot comes to your field. And if you're a DJI pilot, how you can most effectively work well with other analog pilots. Number one, just stay the frick away from them, okay? Keep your air unit away from their goggles and keep your goggles away from their goggles, and don't power up when they're flying, because remember, you're going to power up on race band 6 no matter what channel you're actually on. Proximity seems to be the real danger. Everything seems to mostly work okay as long as there's some distance between these guys. I would love to do more testing on this. The number one thing that I would like to do is move the DJI goggles closer, like we were on race band 1 and race band 8. What if we were on race band 1 and race band 2? But as you could probably tell, it was a pretty full day of testing, and that is all we're going to do for this video. Can I just take 1 second and remind you that this is my full-time job? Yeah, this nonsense, what you've seen me doing here all night. Can you freaking believe it? That is what I do to pay the bills. And if you feel like I earned it, can I remind you, I have a Patreon. There's a link in the video description. You can go down there and you can subscribe to me for $2 a month or more if you feel like I earned it. And you can also use my affiliate links down in the bottom of most of my videos. If there's a product in it, there's an affiliate link. You click that link and you make any purchase, not just the link. You don't like the DJI system? Go click the Race Day Quads, Rotor Riot, Get FPV link. Anyway, do your normal shopping and I get a small commission, and that is one of the ways I support myself. It's a small amount, but it does add up and it really means a lot. Thank you guys so much. I'm exhausted. That was a lot of work. We're going to call this one, and I will see you next time. You can still make some flying. sort of walking around with goggles on my face and DVRs rolling all. No, actually, I love that. That's my little dirty secret. I love this stuff. I love this stuff almost more than just flying quads. I love science. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy flying, everybody.